being grateful for your eating disorder. Like if your binge eating
Right.
has gotten you through a time, it's gotten you through trauma, it's gotten you through grief and loss and pain and whatever things that life has thrown at you, if you can kind of come at it from the perspective of like, I'm glad my eating disorder was there to serve me in this way.
Welcome to the Binge Dietitian podcast. I'm Jonathan, and I'm here to help you end 24/7 food thoughts, binge eating, and actually enjoy life with food. This episode is for educational and informational purposes only, not to be substituted for medical or personalized advice. Check the link in the description for my recovery resources, and let's get straight to the episode. And in today's episode, I want to invite a special guest today, the eating disorder dietitian, Christy Maloney. So, Christy, how about you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Yeah, it's so great to be here. Thank you for having me on. I am a registered dietitian in the United States, more specifically in Charlotte, North Carolina. A little bit about me. I have been a dietitian for 12 years now. Prior to going to school for nutrition, I got a degree in psychology, then went back to school for nutrition, and then have been working in the field for, again, 12 years. I have been working specifically with eating disorders for 10 years. So the first couple of years of that was in the clinical setting, and then I've worked at higher levels of care in eating disorder treatment facilities, and then have had my own private practice for going on about 4 years now, actually right at 4 years now. And so my company is called Enhanced Nutrition Associates. We're a team of 7 dietitians that treat people with eating disorders, disordered eating, and then also offer medical nutrition therapy from a weight neutral perspective.
And just from a personal perspective, because you mentioned that you used to work in a clinical setting and then moved to a private setting, what was the transition like? Did you just jump straight to full-time private work, or was there like side hustle kind of quote unquote thing?
Yeah, so I just to give a little bit more of that history. So I worked for 2 years
Mhm.
as a clinical dietitian. So part of that was working on the behavioral health floor, where I did come into contact, some with people that were an inpatient for eating disorder treatment. Then 4 years at a treatment facility. So then to answer your question more specifically, when I left there, it was kind of like a jump straight in, like we're going to dive in and do this. And, of course that was really scary at the time, but looking back, it was the best, personal and professional decision I could have made for sure.
Yeah, I'm just asking because I'm in the process of like transitioning to like full time, but at the moment for me, personally, it's a side quote unquote side hustle. But it's really exciting to work both in clinical and I'll call it like non-clinical at the moment. Just
Yeah. Yeah.
just it's basically a business, really. Yeah, really exciting. And like at the moment, you have a team of 7 people. Did you always have a team of 7 people, or did it just did you take people one at a time?
Yeah. So when I started 4 years ago, it was just me, um, which was interesting. Then about 10 months later, I hired someone. So that was in October 2019. And then the pandemic hit and we were all trying to figure out life. So then in June 2021 is when I hired the third dietitian. And so then I've brought on the others since then. So what is that? 5 more people in just under 2 years has kind of been the trajectory for that.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll get into it later on about like COVID and how it affected like your business and your client range. But you said you were studying, you were working as a dietitian for roughly 2 years, am I correct? And then you moved on to work with eating disorders.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
What was that triggered, or did you just find the job to work as an eating disorder dietitian?
Well, having my first degree was in psychology. So I've always been kind of
Psychology.
drawn to like the mental health aspect of things. Um, when I went back to school to be a dietitian, as a lot of us do, I was kind of immersed in my own disordered eating patterns. So for me, going back to school to be a dietitian was a really great way to be kind of very disordered and have it be praised, societally. but then went back to school, became a dietitian, and then figured out that, like, through that path or that course, all the courses really, but that my patterns were disordered and really worked on my own relationship with food. So then, fast forward to when I had actually become a dietitian, I just really, it's kind of like where the worlds collide, right? Like, I've had this degree in psychology, a degree in nutrition, this personal experience with, disordered eating kind of stuff. And it just, I kind of say I didn't choose it, it chose me. And that's kind of where I landed. When I was working in clinical was not exactly my cup of tea, but, I knew that eating disorders would be, and I knew ultimately that's where I wanted to land.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. And how did having a psychology degree help in your eating disorder, like helping clients with eating disorders? Does it have a massive difference, or is it just a little thing on the side?
I think it's been immensely helpful because we know that eating disorders do not exist in isolation from other mental health conditions.
Yeah.
So having that background and knowledge about, the different diagnoses and, that kind of thing has been really helpful. I will say having that basic knowledge was good, but so much of what I have learned and know has come through, hands-on experience, working with clients, that kind of thing. So I would say, it's pretty foundational, but the bulk of it is from experience.
Yeah. Oh, experience. So, like, you mean like with your personal
Mm.
struggle with? Yeah, go on.
No, well, just my understanding of psychology has come through, interactions, and experiences with clients. Sorry, I didn't make that clear. Yeah.
No, yeah, that's completely fine. Yeah,
Mhm.
oh, that's really interesting. And from your interactions with clients, how did you find that COVID? How did you find it COVID affected your practice?
Yeah. So pre-COVID, I offered only in-person clients. I've always, excuse me, seeing clients 4 days a week. Pre-COVID, it was in person only. So then, of course, when COVID hit, like most people, I had to scramble to kind of figure it out. And then in the United States, because healthcare is a little bit different, it took not too long actually to different health insurance companies were actually fairly quickly responsive. So then at that point, they started paying for telehealth because we are a practice that accepts insurance. Um, they started paying for telehealth. So I pretty much immediately converted my all in person practice to all online practice. And that happened really fast. But then, I think as we kind of went through the pandemic, has been, still is a mental health crisis. So for me, I saw a lot more people that had a lot more highly acute eating disorders,
Mhm.
but I was able to help more people because there was such an ability to see people that were not located, like immediately in Charlotte, which, it's what caused my team to ultimately grow is because of that accessibility. But now we see a mix of in-person and telehealth. So ultimately through COVID, it's gone. The trajectory has been all in person to all telehealth. So now we do hybrid. And we found that this model is really effective for both us and our clients.
Yeah, oh, that's really interesting because here in the UK, have you heard of the NHS?
Yes.
Yeah, the National Health Service. So it's like a public, quote unquote, free. Well, it's paid by the taxpayers.
Yeah.
But like for those who don't know, in the UK we have the National Health Service here in the UK, and people can get quote unquote free consultations with like dietitians, doctors, and everything. But with the eating disorder service, it's crazy busy. The waiting list here in the UK just to get a consultation, maybe like a 30-minute or 45-minute consultation with a dietitian, with an eating disorder dietitian, is 6 months. And for some places, it's maybe like a whole year. Just simply get a consultation. It's really, really bad. So, like you starting your private practice probably would do wonders. But what's it like? What's a waiting list like there um, in the US? But am I correct? You have to pay for things or use insurance?
Both, kind of.
Mhm.
So, to answer the first question for a waiting list, I've structured my company that there
Mhm.
is no waiting list. If somebody needs to get in, we can see them within a week.
Oh,
Just
wow.
I always have somebody that has availability, either in person or telehealth. And we're licensed in multiple states throughout the United States, but that's kind of the way it's structured. We do take insurance, and working on taking more insurances because, in the United States, it's a bunch of different insurances. There's a lot going on here.
Maze.
Yeah. So some insurances pay, some don't. So we really have a mix of in-person and self-pay. And I would say that on any given day, insurance and self-pay. So I would say on any given day, 50 to 70% of our clients would use insurance, and the other, 40 to 50% would be self-pay.
Yeah. Well, since we're on the topic of it, like later on, we'll just for those who are listening, we'll touch on where you can find to work with Christy and where to follow her in social media. Because it seems like
Perfect.
1 week waiting list. Or did you say no waiting list? No waiting
Generally, it's within a few days. Yep.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, yeah, that's amazing, Christy. But on the topic of eating disorders, the majority of people listening to this podcast struggle with binge eating. Would you briefly just touch on, like, what are the main issues you find people who come to you struggling with binge eating? What are the main issues they seek advice for, or main issues that you find that need, lack of a better word, support with?
Yeah. So a lot of times, or almost every time that somebody comes in with binge eating disorder, my first question is, where's the restricting, right? So what is the history of dieting? Are you currently trying to diet or restrict yourself in some way that's leading to binging? And then we kind of, dive into what has set up that, right? Like if somebody's dieting or restricting, we really want to look in depth at, like, okay, but where did those rules come from? And why did you start dieting? And, what messages have you gotten about food and weight and body that cause you to still want to restrict? So primarily, that's what I see. Of course, there are some people that come in that just binge, right? Like there's no restricting, it just sort of happens. And I find that happens a lot in response to trauma of some sort, or, there can be like body image discomfort where people kind of eat to cope and eat not to feel. I see that a lot. But, generally speaking, we're looking at like where the restrictive stuff is coming in. And then alongside that, especially because binge eating is triggered a lot of times by trauma and body image, anxiety, depression, those sorts of things, then we want to make sure that we're making appropriate referral to a mental health care professional that can help kind of get at some of the underlying stuff as well.
Yeah. Because when people think about binge eating, they always think about, if I go to a dietitian, they're going to just talk about what I binge on. But it's not about what they're binging on during the moment. It's about what's led to the binge episodes, or where's the deprivation. Because for people who are struggling with binge eating, at least when I personally struggle with binge eating, the number one thing that's always on your mind, it's clouding your mind after a binge is, okay, I need to make up for my binge. What's the fastest diet I can jump onto to reverse all of this and everything? What would you say to people who are constantly jumping from diet to diet and struggling with binge eating?
Yeah. The first thing is, you haven't failed the diet has failed you. And that can be applicable to any diet. Diets at their core don't work. And that's why we know that on average, 97% of people that diet and lose weight gain it back. And, I always kind of say, like, if diets work, we would all be skinny, but we're not all meant to be thin, and that's okay. If somebody is struggling with that, I would just kind of remind them that, the response to binging, binging isn't going to be cured with more restricting. More restricting is going to perpetuate the binging. And I think when we can shift that mindset from I'm binging and this is the behavior that's getting in my way to I'm like restricting, but actually that's the behavior that's getting in my way, that's when we can start to make like leaps and bounds progress.
Yeah. And one of the biggest barriers to people recovering from binge eating, and you cover a range of eating disorders, and most of the issues is that fear. How can people go through that fear of eating more? Maybe they have doubts in their mind. They might have doubts like, oh, but if I do this, I'm going to gain weight. And what if I never stop eating? What if I never stop gaining weight? How do you address those fears for people who are struggling with eating disorders?
Yeah. So, the first one, right? If somebody's, and I hear this all the time, right? Is that an eating disorders dietitian is if I start eating the things I love, I'll never stop. So then we talk about habituation and, what that means in terms of if you allow foods in, like eventually you're going to get used to them and it's not going to hold that same power, and I think that, that's the real scary part because it's letting go of the rules. But I always kind of like to point out very lovingly that if the rules worked, they would have worked. And obviously those patterns aren't serving them. So that, it's kind of like the discomfort of doing things a different way. And just, kind of trust in the process that as we allow more things, like they're going to become less and less scary, which means less restriction, less binging, and overall the patterns just sort out. In terms of weight gain, I practice from a weight neutral perspective, meaning that weight is going to be what it's going to be. We don't set out to I don't help people go on diets to lose weight. We just kind of explore and see what's your body telling us. So I always ask clients to put their concerns about weight, if we can just sit it on the back burner for a second, if we can just put it to the side and focus on the behaviors and the things that are getting in the way, because if we're focused on weight, our ability to make progress in an eating disorder is really stalled. Then we had that conversation around, so if you do gain weight, but it means that you don't have this relationship with food that is so tenuous and so exhausting, is it worth it? Which one's worse? And I like to point out to people, they might gain weight, they might stay the same, they might lose weight. I don't know. Their body's going to tell us what it needs to be. But if they gain weight, I always like to point out to people too that your ability to exist at a weight that is higher than you think you can mentally handle, it might be different when you're there. If you're recovered from an eating disorder and your relationship with food is good and your weight went up, you might be just fine with that. You can't predict how you'll feel in those situations. So it's approaching with exploration and curiosity and just kind of leaning into the process, because those letting go of those rules around what to eat, what not to eat, letting go of, the thoughts of gaining weight, the fear of gaining weight. If we can get through that, we're on the way.
Yeah, that's perfect. You explained that really, really well. Hey,
Thank you.
a little break before we continue with the podcast. What if I told you that you could end binge eating once and for all and still keep all the binge foods you love, but without losing control over them? Yep, it is possible. You don't need any willpower, no more jumping from diet to diet, and no more meal replacement shakes. You'll also improve your bloating, heartburn, and low energy levels. It's all possible with my self-paced online course called the Binge Freedom Blueprint. It's everything I wish I knew when I struggled with binge eating, all packaged into one platform to help you live the life you truly deserve. The whole goal is to help you put an end to Googling binge eating help once and for all, and to focus fully on the things we really care about in life, such as friends, family, and relationships. So click the link in the description of this podcast now to learn more about the Binge Freedom Blueprint. And with that, let's get back straight to the episode. And so going back, because I think some people would want something to relate to, when you struggled with disordered eating habits back then in the past when you were studying dietetics, what were those disordered eating patterns?
Yeah. So in my early 20s, I, as most of us have done, was like, oh, I want to lose a little bit of weight. I'm going to go on a diet. So I started on the low carb diet, and that eventually just sort of evolved into calorie counting and all of these things. And it became really restrictive. It was, I never was diagnosed with an eating disorder or had treatment or anything like that. But I mean, hindsight, now know what I know. I know exactly what was happening. But then the pendulum swang to binge eating, because I had restricted for so long, that, physiology just kind of takes over and our survival mechanisms kick in, and binge eating started for me. And of course, like I hear all the time, the binging is the scary part, and so that's when it really came to my attention that I needed to kind of get a grasp on things. At that point in my life, I had quite a few stressors. So I think that, I always kind of explain to people that binge eating happens for two reasons. One is physiological, meaning that you don't have enough nutrients, you've restricted, and your survival mechanisms kick in. And then there's the psychological component, dealing with trauma, stress, anxiety, like emotional triggers. And so when you have both, like you're not going to overcome that, on your own. So I had both of those things going, when binging started. And, I did at that point go to therapy and sort of work through some of those issues. But, it kind of ran the gamut of things, including, in my recovery, I was at an underweight status when I was restricting. And then I gained weight, when my relationship with food settled. And I can honestly say I'm far happier now than I ever was, when I was in the throes of restricting.
Yeah, and did you struggle with the idea that you gained weight, or was it are you still in the process of, you know, um, loving your body and everything?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it was hard because it was definitely, I think, especially when you lose a lot of weight, that becomes kind of your identity. It's like, oh, you're the healthy one. You're the one that eats
Yeah.
salad all the time. Nothing wrong with salad, but you kind of take that on as an identity.
Yeah.
So there was a little bit of loss of that. There was fear of, are people going to judge me? People that haven't seen me in a while and they know I'm going to school to be a dietitian, are they going to judge me? Um, that kind of thing. And I will say that, throughout the course of time, that has evolved. I am very comfortable with where I'm at now. And I would say, with my clients, we talk a lot about the body image spectrum in terms of it being body positive to body neutral to body negative. And I would say on any given day, I'm somewhere in the middle, hopefully a little more toward positive, but some days it's a little more toward negative. And I feel like for the most part, that's just a really realistic spot to be, you know. Some
Yeah.
days I'm like, wow, I look great. This is amazing. And some days I'm like, oh my God, this sucks. And I hate it. Like, I don't want to wear these jeans or whatever the thing is. But ultimately, it's if I can settle on neutral most of the time, I'm great.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just like quick firing on each question after question, but like this is
You're fine.
amazing because I'm getting tons of knowledge, tons of content,
Good.
tons of
Yeah.
eating disorder recovery advice from you, and I'm sure the guests, people who are listening,
Great.
are. So jumping on to the next thing, I feel like we're just going through a recovery journey right now.
Love it.
Yeah. So in terms of body image, which is probably the next barrier, what are things you can recommend for people who are in the process of gaining weight, i.e., I mean, aka recovering, and
Mhm.
what can they do to quote unquote protect their body image or try to maintain a healthy relationship with their body during recovery? What are some things that they can do?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that stand out to me is like a gratitude. When you're in the midst of severely disliking, hating your body, having a really poor body image, I know that gratitude for that same body might feel like really far away. But the more you connect to my body is actually doing the thing that it needs to do to keep me alive, like my body is actually trying to make me heal and make me okay. I think that that's a really beautiful way to look at it. I know a lot of times, even, kind of kin to that is being grateful for your eating disorder. Like if your binge eating
Right.
has gotten you through a time, it's gotten you through
Mm.
trauma, it's gotten you through grief and loss and pain and whatever things that life has thrown at you, if you can kind of come at it from the perspective of like, I'm glad my eating disorder was there to serve me in this way, right? Like, I don't love that I had it. I don't want to have it in the future, but, thank you for giving me what I needed in that moment. And then as your body heals and recovers, it's kind of like continuing that into thank you, body, for doing, what I need you to do. I think tangible day-to-day things, my first recommendation for people to protect their body image is curate your social media. Do not follow people that are triggering to you. That by and far is the biggest thing that I see that is harmful to people. I tell people to invest in clothes that they feel comfortable in. Get rid of whatever diet pants they're holding onto in the closet, because it is not helpful to anyone to start their day by walking in their closet and seeing a pair of pants or shirt or whatever it is that they don't fit into. And in their recovery are probably never going to fit back into. That really keeps you stuck. I think that it's important to do things that make your body feel good. So when we think about that, just from the perspective of, I'm going to drink my water and I'm going to get adequate sleep and I'm going to nourish myself with a wide variety of foods and I'm going to have fun and I'm going to laugh and I'm going to go outside and I'm going to engage in joyful movement. All of those practices help like foster the gratitude that, we want to have is like very foundational to our recovery. So those are kind of the big things that I focus on, but, first and foremost, just trying to be grateful for your body, even if you don't love it.
Oh, that's amazing. Like I think we just gone through the whole recovery journey process. Yeah.
Probably.
Well,
Yes, very condensed, but yes.
yeah. Well, that's my free eating disorder dietitian session with you.
Yes,
Yeah.
there we go.
That's amazing. And I'm sure like there are lots of things in between, but in the between those lines, it's never that straightforward. But like, yeah, thank you so much for like just sharing all of that. And in
Yeah.
terms of social media, I like to ask this question. Well, not just social media, everywhere else, but I like to ask this to people who are eating disorder dietitians or work with eating disorders. So when you're at a party, do you tell people that you're a dietitian, and do they maybe go like, "Oh, food police" or anything?
Actually, I do. I think that the people that know me well know that I don't want to hear about your diet. I don't want to hear about like you're trying to lose weight. To each their own. If somebody's dieting or they're focusing on weight loss, that's cool. Like body autonomy is great. But for the most part, people know what I do, and it's sort of the antithesis of that. If somebody is if I'm in a situation where people don't know me and I tell them that I'm a dietitian and I get the, oh, what do you think about this diet? Or, oh, don't look what I'm eating right now.
Get all the
Yeah. One example is my daughter in the United States sells Girl Scout cookies. And so we were at a cookie booth and somebody was walking up to him and he was like, man, I can't eat all that sugar. It'll make me fat. And I just said, no, it'll make you sweeter. So,
that's a good
it's
one.
just that kind of thing of like, how can we kind of like redirect our thoughts around food to something that's more positive and maybe have a little fun with it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's really good. And so like for people who, come across you, do you ever get, strange question, but do you ever get like haters in social media or people who are like, no, that's wrong. You should diet harder. You don't have an eating disorder. You should diet harder because if you don't diet hard enough, then you're not working hard enough, stuff like that. Do you ever get like social media
Yeah.
like that?
I would say the biggest thing I get in that area is like, and I'm it's like promoting obesity. If you don't tell people to lose weight, then you're telling them to be unhealthy. And so coming from a weight neutral perspective is I'm of the belief that we focus on behaviors, not weight. And a lot of people on social media take real issue with that because it's saying that you're giving people a free pass to be unhealthy. And like, well, people get to determine what they do or don't want to do with their health, but I'm literally talking about healthy behaviors, so that's the part that I don't know. There seems to be a disconnect and there's a lot of haters that way.
Yeah. For people who are a bit nervous about talking about like, oh, maybe promoting obesity right now, or just came across this podcast and they thought binge eating. Oh, I want to stop binge eating. I need to lose weight. And they were seeking for some diet advice. And it's not exactly what they were looking for. So,
Nope.
for people who are struggling with binge eating, what are 2 tips you would give, quick fire tips to stop binging? I know we just went through a little bit earlier, but what are some 2 phrases or 2 tips you can give to people who are listening and they were expecting diet advice, but it's not about diet advice?
Yeah. Tricked you.
Good job.
No, the first thing I would say is focus on not restricting. Right. So I know that the underlying feeling is like, I don't want to binge. But if we know that restricting drives the binging, which it almost always does, the first place that we want to focus on is stopping the restricting. And restricting can be behaviors. It can be, I'm going on a diet, I'm not eating carbohydrates, I'm not eating fat, like whatever the thing is, we want to stop doing that. We want to focus on getting enough food consistently and adequately. That's step 1. Step 2 is that we want to work on food neutrality. And food neutrality just simply means food isn't good or bad. It just is. It's a protein, a fat, or a carb, and those things are inherently moral. So we want to look at, what kind of diet or restricting has led you into a place of maybe thinking one food is really good and one food is really bad. That also drives binging from a psychological perspective, because if you eat an apple and you say, oh, I was good because I ate that, or I ate fries and I'm bad because I ate that. If you eat the fries and feel like, oh, I've already done it now, may as well keep going, and not listening to those hunger and fullness cues, that perpetuates the binging. So we have the physical restricting. We want to stop that. We want to not diet. We want to work on eating adequately and consistently. And we want to stop the mental restricting of the rules, the good, bad foods, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, physical and mental restriction. I always preach about that. It's most people think about like, oh, I'm eating regular meals. Why am I still binging? But there's still the mental aspect, like you said, which might be some trauma. It might also be the all or nothing mindset, stuff like that. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And when we think about, especially for people that have been dieting for years or grew up with their parents telling them to lose weight, that kind of thing, people have years, sometimes decades of rules that they've accumulated about food. So it takes some undoing to do that. But if you can start looking at that through a critical lens and like, where did I learn that? That's when the magic starts to happen.
Yeah. I remember my mom back then, she doesn't do it. She only did it for like maybe a week and then maybe just disappeared. But she used to say like, oh, you could only have dessert only if you eat all of your meals. And I'll be like, oh, I'm so full, but I want some dessert. And she'd be like, think about the kids in Africa. Like, you need to eat and make the most of it, because other people don't have this privilege of having food in their plates.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like we've all grown up, I think, with some aspect of that, but I know it was because I've heard those same things too. And it's like, well, while that is a really great sentiment, it's also a little misguided, like, love you, mom, but we didn't have to.
Oh, yeah. My mom's amazing, by the way. I think this is a generational thing, really.
Oh, yeah. My mom, she was the same way for sure.
Was she? How's she now? Now that she knows her daughter is an eating disorder dietitian.
Well, not to like bring the mood down, but she passed about 12 years ago. So she never got to see all of this come into fruition. But I will say that she would be very proud. I know she would.
I'm sure she will. You're helping tons of people.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, on that note, Christy, if people want to work with you, remember, no waiting list, and follow you on social media, where can they find you?
Yeah, so my professional Instagram is at eatingdisorder.dietitian. My company's nutrition page is at enhance_dietitians. And then our website is enhancednutritionassociates.com.
That's amazing. And you can find all of those in the link in the description of this podcast. So, Christy, there's one more question I'd like to ask. And so there's this tradition that happens in this podcast where the previous guest would ask a question for the current guest, which is you. And the previous guest, Jen, the intuitive eating dietitian, would like to ask you, Christy, is what are some coping strategies to deal with stress? Wait, oh, I'll word it in a different way. What are some coping strategies you use to deal with stress without using food?
Yeah, it's a great one. My top very first coping skill is to get my 2 dogs. They're both half French Bulldog and half Boston Terrier.
Oh,
And we snuggle up in the bed in a big pile. And that for me, the warmth and the fuzzy, like that for me is my biggest coping skill. Outside of that, I love to be outside. I spend as much time as I can outside. And then I read a lot, and watch sports. So all of those things for me, I feel like provide like comfort and warmth and a connection. For me, the things that are comforting are the things that, like most of us, that I found comforting in my childhood. So dogs, outside, reading, sports, those things reconnect me to a part of myself that felt really good. So what I do.
Oh, that's really nice. I bet they must be well-behaved dogs for you to bring them to the bed.
Oh yeah, they're I'm a dog person, so I would literally have 10 dogs in my bed every single night if my husband wouldn't divorce me over it.
To me, that's a dream.
Right?
Oh,
same.
yeah. Well, and what book are you currently reading at the moment?
Right now, I'm reading a book
books?
called Book Nerds.
Book Nerds. Okay.
Yep.
What's that about?
It's about two people that work in book publishing, and they are kind of like rival enemy people, but then they kind of fight each other and like each other. So it's good. It's a lighthearted read. At the end of my day, I like things that are simple. And so that's my relax at night book right now.
Oh, it sounds nice. Like it's more fiction.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I read a lot for work too, but that's my fun reading stuff.
Yeah, it's your time to relax and chill.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, that's amazing. And so what is the question you would like to give for the next guest?
That is a great question. Oh, that's a hard one. If my question would be is if you could if you could go back and talk to your 8-year-old self about relationship with food, what would you say?
Wow, that's a really, really good question.
Thank you.
I'm gonna throw it back at you. Personally, for you, what it's a curveball. But what's your answer to that question?
Well, I'm 41. I'll be 42 this year. So my almost 42-year-old self would say, it's not that serious. Food is meant to be enjoyed. Food is, if you look at any society, food is foundational to togetherness and, company and that kind of thing. I would say that you want to eat well, like you want to have your fruits and veggies. You want to have a wide variety of foods. Your favorite food will be French fries when you get older, and that's okay. And then I would just kind of say, like, all foods fit, like don't stress about any of it. Have a little bit of everything. Move your body in a way that feels good, and the rest will sort itself out.
That's amazing. Oh, thanks. So, Christy, thanks so much for coming along to this podcast. And once again, if you want to find where to work with Christy or follow Christy, then check the link in the description of this podcast. Well, thanks so much for coming along to this podcast, Christy.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
What if I told you you can end binge eating and still keep all the foods you love without dieting, without willpower, and no more meal plans? Check the link in the description for my exclusive self-paced Binge Freedom Blueprint online course to learn everything I wish I knew when I struggle with binge eating. It's all packaged into one platform to make it easy to transform your life right now.